Welcome again to our 10th committee podcast. This is a series of conversations with strata experts about how to build effective communities. The focus of our conversations will mostly be around the human factors rather than the legal requirements. Join us again today is Catherine Leeser with experience of the multi-apartment living, many project improvements, and with a particular passion for sustainability. Catherine is also our first lot owner to become a president of SCA WA. Welcome back, Catherine. And with us today is David Hamilton again, also experienced with multi-storey apartment living here in Victoria. And he has a particular expertise of preparing buildings for EV compatibility. And shares with us some of his learnings from that experience. David is also one of the founders of the new Southbank 3006, a new owners networking group. And if we have time at the end of the session, David, we might just get an update on how that is going for you. So that would be good to hear. So welcome again, David, for coming back. In earlier episodes, we explored why people volunteer to be on a committee, their experience of joining a committee, and what are the most important steps for a committee to do from day one, and managing your manager along the way. Recapping, there were 5 important steps, and these are I always just remind everyone of these. Building relationships with the manager and the committee, creating a work plan for the year, which is just the action list to be achieved, creating handover from the outgoing committee to incoming committees so that there's a seamless transition of projects and where you're up to. Keeping communication open and transparent, very important. And of course, the recruitment, how do we get people onto the committee? And in that was an induction pack for committees and one for the strata manager and one for the chair. That way everybody starts on the journey understanding the expectations and what everybody is to be doing. All these recordings from the past sessions are available and simply just email the SCA Vic office and we can let you know where you can access them. In the last 2 sessions, Nick and Catherine chatted with David about his committee experience with EV readiness and the Southbank 3006 initiative. We did touch on, in particular, the importance of surveying owners as part of that process. We also did discuss, particularly in last session, we were looking at due care and diligence and what committees should ensure they do, which of course included making sure they get the right type of advice and using the right type of experts to get that advice. So in this session, we're going to kind of remember that discussion so that because, you know, I've read a few things during the week that sort of made me feel that this topic is about the right way and the wrong way to approach preparing your building for EVs. And in saying that, I am, very conscious that a number of committees are thinking that they have to rush into this, that they get that first request of, I've bought an EV and where am I going to plug it in? And I'm also mindful of the other mindset that's saying, well, you bought a petrol car, but we didn't rush to put a Bowser in the basement. And there's sort of got to be a balance of reasonableness here and also but approaching it from the right angle. So during the week, I read a couple of examples of actions by committee, including one where it was running an extension lead with a power board from the common property outlet to provide power to a private car space, but to the same kind of principle, really, but on a bigger scale, where the committee considered surveying the owners and decided it was not important, considered separate metering and decided it was too expensive, met with an electrician and decided that they had enough capacity to roll out 15 amp power outlets to 75 car parks and then cover the additional cost of the electricity usage, that they'll raise a levy each year from those owners who have an electric car. So in their mind, it was a very scalable solution, and they were running cable trays to allow people to then run their own power outlet, basically their own extension lead across to their car park. And as I said, I know committees are starting to think they have to rush into this, but I'm going to throw to you, David. Is there a right way to go about it? Is capacity the only thing to consider? And where have they strayed wrong?
Right. Thank you, Julie. Well, we can definitely say the people that bought a power board and ran an extension lead, they strayed. They couldn't have broken more rules than you can consider. I'm quite certain that nobody would ever consider that was a safe way of connecting electric vehicle car chargers. In fact, even in a house, a single unit dwelling in your own with a garage, you can't do that. In fact, every supplier of that portable charging equipment makes quite a point that you should never attach an extension lead to one of those chargers. So right up front, that is highly dangerous and potentially would create a fire in that particular circuit. Right. So that's, if we just park that one. We then think about the second approach that's been taken. And again, that's a little bit courageous on a number of fronts. Firstly, having an electrician tell you that there's enough load in your switchboard or a distribution board. If we go back to that old adage, dial before you dig. In the world of EV, in multi-story or multi-dwelling situations where you're retrofitting, it's not dial before you dig, it's measure before you design. So you need to know the supply to the building. You need to have ideally 24/7, but as a minimum 24/3, analysis of the load on the existing infrastructure on the main switchboard. Absolutely critical, because otherwise you could spend money and then discover, as I've seen, that there isn't sufficient capacity in the building. Or there's very limited capacity. And yes, it can be managed, but the style of infrastructure that you've just described wouldn't be a possibility. So I think that's a one lesson out of that way of doing it. And I suppose the second and related part is how do they determine the fee that is going to be paid by EV owners? Yes, I can see that you can determine the fee for the supply of the cable tray, but I don't know how you account for the electricity that's consumed, and then legally how you recover the costs of that electricity. The latter is a very thorny and difficult question because an owners' corporation will run foul of depending on where you are, either the Australian Energy Regulator, or if you're in Victoria, the ESC. So, because you'd be reselling electricity, and you don't have a retailing license, and you're not an exempt embedded network. It just goes on and on and on in those areas. So I think that's courageous, but good luck, one could only just wish them well. But I think there's it's a there are far smarter ways of tackling it. And that's, there are some proven technologies that deal with all of the questions that come up in owners corporations. So I think, I'll just close on saying one other thing. I've come across in the last week 3 statements which are basically, we either shouldn't do something or we should just put together a Band-Aid solution because this is a rapidly changing area of technology. And often the example of the iPhone is brought out, or a mobile phone is brought out. Once it was a brick and now it's this. And that's what's going to happen with EV charging. And, the short answer to that is the technology that's involved in EV charging, the infrastructure in an owner's corporate, in a building, hasn't basically changed in the last 100 years. Right? It's a piece of copper wire. It's a circuit breaker, which is an updated version of a fuse, and then there's a distribution board. Right? That hasn't changed in a long, long time, and is unlikely to. What has changed is within the vehicle. Right? So that it is the smarts that are in the vehicle where the technology changes, not in the building infrastructure. And a good example of that is in early June, Apple filed a patent in the US to make charging of vehicles faster. Not in the infrastructure, not in the charger outside the car, but in the charging system within the car. Because if we follow it through, what you have is an AC current, which comes to the charger, into a cable, and is then plugged into a car. You then need to convert the AC to DC, and that occurs inside the vehicle. Right? And that then is what is charging it's a DC current in that charges the battery. It's not AC. It's not an AC charging facility. So that rectification process has to go on, and Apple's found a smarter way, or at least they've patented something that they think will be faster. So that's a technology change, but it won't change the bit that an owner's corporation has to worry about. So, it's not a question of, but we're going to be buying a brick and now we're going to have one of these 6 months later. There are a lot of other pieces of technology which will change, but not that one. Unless I suppose the only area I ever see a bit of technology changing is in the inductive loop, but that again requires exactly the same infrastructure. That is, you've got to get a cable to a car park, and then it has to be put into the concrete or on a pad under a car. That requires the manufacturers to change. There's a test track in Europe where they've worked out how to charge a vehicle as it drives past. Again, that requires the manufacturer to change the vehicle. And yes, and then you need to put all of that infrastructure into the public roads, into the public road space. That's not going to occur. Not at least in my lifetime, although I've got grey hair, so that's a fairly short span. Okay, I'll stop talking at that point.
Well, I'll throw the cat amongst the pigeons and say I read an article during the week where they've developed a robot, if you like. Think about robo vacuum cleaners now, where it's a mobile charging station and it goes down to your car park. It's got a big battery in it, right? So it goes down to your car in your car park, plugs in, charges the car, and then it goes back and gets topped up itself. So it's kind of same kind of thing. It doesn't change the poles and the wires and the circuit breaker. Absolutely agree. But there may be something on the way. How much of this is real and how much is just a test, a test. But you kind of see it happening in so many, this automation, if you like. Like I said, we've all got well, I don't, but I'm envious of people who do have one of those little vacuum cleaners that run around and do it, and the lawn, there's out there that you can get for your lawn. So that technology is there, and it's about putting the battery on wheels perhaps, and etc. But whether that's ready to roll out and how much that would be in terms of the static infrastructure, I don't know. But yes, you're right, it's a changing.
I think you've got to think, Julie, that there's a lot of stuff which comes out and into the media which is directed at the household, right?
Yes.
So the single unit dwelling.
Mm.
But the situation that we live in a multi-unit high-rise situation, the infrastructure and the problems are far more complex, and they are not only technical, but they're commercial and they're legal, because it's the interface between the owner's corporation and the individual owner. Whereas if you own the house, you're the owner's corporation. There is nobody else that you've got to argue with.
Yeah.
So that I think is one significant variable. If you want to talk automation, we can talk about that another day. The most significant change which will occur in this whole area is that we won't need to own motor vehicles. And you'll have autonomous vehicles, you'll order a vehicle, it'll turn up, you'll get in it, it will drive you where you want to go. You won't drive it, it will drive you. You will get out, and that will be it. Now, what that disruptive change will mean is that all the car parks that we have and garages and everything else, all of that investment will need to be repurposed. And,
yes.
But again, how long is that going to? How far is that away? A long way away. You'll see it first in car sharing, taxis, etc. In other words, the days of an Uber driver and a taxi driver are numbered.
Yes,
that will occur in my lifetime.
I agree with that. I agree with that. And of course, bringing it back to the context for us today is that the shift to electric vehicles is going to dominate quicker. So the problem still around getting our buildings prepared for that change is the first milestone. Yes, the rest will come, but we've still got to go through this first milestone anyway. We need to keep an eye on the prize. I
think in the last meeting, we had, you flagged that if you worked back from the commitments made by the current government in terms of climate change and emissions, then buildings really needed to have got themselves to being EV ready in about 6 years' time, at the worst, at the best, 8 years' time. So by 2030, at the latest, they've got to have done it. For an owner's corporation, there's another imperative. That is, the National Construction Code is going to require all new buildings to have it. Just down the road from me, in South Bank, there's a 100+ story building proposed, very glamorous. It will have it in it. Upmarket building. Across the road, just completed 2 years ago, is another upmarket building. So they pitch against each other in the marketplace. It doesn't have EV charging. It needs to retrofit, and as a matter of urgency, because there will be people who will be making a very, very clear and conscious choice in purchasing. Do I go for a building with an EV charging network, or do I go for one where I've got to drive several kilometres to plug into a fast charger? Yeah. I think the choice will be very simple. The buyer will make that one, and the vendors will find it will get harder and harder to sell their apartments.
I would agree with that. I think the driver is going to come, ultimately from that end to do so. But so that becomes one of the motivations for committees to consider moving to this sooner rather than later, irrespective of whether they actually have somebody who said, that I want an EV.
That's right. And it doesn't have to be in an upmarket building. Every apartment building.
Yeah, it needs to address it in some way. And I think,
that's right.
So if we come back to the topic, is that ways that I've heard, apart from the two stories I led with, is that a couple of the older buildings where they are, so in other words, they are starting to consider their EV policy, irrespective of whether somebody has asked for the service yet or not. And they're starting to look at things like, well, we've got 6 visitor parks. Do we look at getting those as our starting point? So I guess given, David, that you've been around a few buildings now, what sorts of suggestions and ideas have you come across that sort of give people a bit, other than just a full, retrofit right across every car park? What's sort of some of the little ideas that people could start their conversations around and investigate around?
Well, first of all, you don't need to retrofit every car park. Right? You just need to have a design that enables you to grow the EV charging capability as the number of EVs increase. That's the first thing. So it doesn't have to be a big leap in with a lot. The question of visitor car parks is a very I think, well, at least in Victoria, an interesting legal question. We don't give legal advice, but there is an asset that the Owners Corporation owns and is available to all members. If you suddenly convert a visitor car parks into EV charging facilities, then the people who will be using those EV charging facilities are owners, not visitors. That raises a problem with your original planning approval. Secondly, is that alienating an Owners Corporation common asset for a group of owners, and they don't pay anything more for that? Well, but you can't, because it's an Owners Corporation asset. You can't. So I think it's a very difficult legal area to stray into, and one where I can see there will be challenges. There will be challenges from people who say, but that's where my daughter parks when she comes to the building. You can't, now she can't park there because there's always an EV parked in it. It becomes also separately an administrative nightmare for managers of buildings, because people park their car, go away, and come back a day later. And 3 other people wanted to charge their car. So it's not really a solution. It's very messy, and I think people really need to think hard and long, I should say, about diving into the visitor car park solution.
I would say there is a technology solution to that, because you sort of go, well, if they're in the EV spot, their spot must be vacant. And there are some fabulous parking apps that actually, you could load up and be using for exactly that. I mean, there would be a solution. I understand your point, though, because that is primary, that the visitors' car parks are there, and they're often located right next to the lift or the entry, like for that reason, so they're convenient. Whereas the substitute one might be, on basement 3 and the furthest away from the lift, so not acceptable. But And may in Victoria run you foul of the Section 173A agreement that you have with the council on the use of car parks. Yes. Just another small legal area of mine. That's the point. This is not a simple, quick fix area. There is this complex Venn diagram of legal, commercial, and technical. And you've got to find the right spot
that meets all of those variables. And there are people such as myself who help owners corporations step through that in that journey.
Yes, yeah. So Catherine is from WA, and I know from our previous discussions, she's quite excited about the conversations about EVing the building. Is there anything about so far what the sort of things that we've covered off that would be different if you're not in Victoria, other than the types of resolutions, you know, that the committee or the members may need to take?
Yes. We are very in the infancy of looking at EV charging here, and I pick up on what David said about the building. Oh, you said it, Julie, about it being a long-term kind of thing. I've heard of a building here in WA where the very first thing they did was do a base load calculation. So you'd be happy with them, David. They did a base load calculation of what's coming into the building, and then they realised they didn't have enough to charge their EVs. So they went to the provider, and the provider said, oh, our substation's maxed out. We can't give you any more energy even if you wanted to. So they are now going to go on a 5-year plan of reducing how much they use in the building through other mechanisms, like reducing their lighting and becoming more efficient and all that stuff, before they may actually have any leftover energy to charge EVs. So it is really a long-term thing. But back to your point, Julie, about what we're doing here, it's the same sort of thing, except there's one little wrinkle in the laws here, where it does allow people to put in what they call utility infrastructure. And you don't need to, so anyone who owns an apartment here could just give notice that I'm putting in infrastructure, utility infrastructure, and then go and install it. There's no requirement to go to an AGM or anything more than that. Now, I don't think they contemplated EV charging when they created that little loophole. I think they were talking about, you know, putting in air conditioning or something else. So there's a little bit of consternation going at the minute. And we are working behind the scenes with our legal people here, which is called Landgate. And Landgate, we've asked Landgate if they could, in our 10-year plans, if they could please put in a baseload calculation, or at least make sure energy infrastructure is included in the 10-year plan. Because at the minute, it's not legislated that any energy infrastructure is included in the 10-year plan. So we've got a bit of work to do on all angles here, but your point is well taken, David, that it is still a very building-specific problem. Every building is so different. Every building has such different needs and requirements, but it's the starting point's the same. What's your base load? What are you trying to achieve? How do you do it fairly, et cetera, et cetera?
Mm. Yes, and that how do you do it fairly is really that, I guess, it comes back to David with the visitors car parks, or however it is they're trying to solve the problem.
Yes, it's quite interesting. I've seen old buildings where we can find this fantastic supply and load. And I can have got very recently completed buildings where that is a real problem. But with a good dynamic load management system and fine-tuning, because you know from your capacity analysis, from your load analysis, that not everything in the building is going to be being used 24/7. But there will be significant periods of the day where you can find a band that you should possibly be able to fit in your EV charging. Anyway, that's for another day.
Yes, that's one we'll get to. So again, we're just coming to the end of our session, and a great session there. I think the number one point was that we don't run a extension lever in the power board. That's not for early adopters. And the other is thinking about the due care and due diligence sort of comment is about making sure that you do get the right people involved. And that's not saying that the electrician is not the right person, but there may be bigger, wider viewpoint to this. Measure, that is definitely coming across from both Catherine and David there, to make sure you understand the capacity and the loading that's going to happen for that building over time in particular. So it's not just a once-off reading or reading what the circuit breaker can do or anything like that. Like you, Catherine, I have heard of buildings the same, and I'm sure David has as well, where there is no juice. They can't upgrade their supply. And I think your point of saying that they then put about, so in other words, they're thinking it's EV, but hang on, we've got to spend 2-3 years actually reducing our power just so that we can fit it in. You know, and if you didn't know that, like David said, you'll end up spending money doing a whole lot of stuff that is a white elephant because you've got to address other problems. So there's a lot into it, and I think it's a really just sustainability on its whole. And as we go forward with next month's conversation as well, David, we will dig deeper further into your role as a consultant in this area, and about the value of bringing that expert opinion to this and how you can step them through. So again, I thank you, Catherine, for joining us and sharing with us with your wisdom, and David, the same with you, in particular, the being a subject matter expert in the area, and look forward to next month.